So the topic that I'm going to be talking about today is going to be poverty and health inequities. Saying that, let's firstly look at the poverty in the current status quo. So poverty, it has actually been better it has actually decreased compared to past years. However, the problem has been that people who are in poverty are most likely in a very extreme state, and this has been appearing a lot, especially in developing countries. Saying that, let's firstly think about if there's a connection between poverty and health. So there's a visual representation that I prepared. So there's clearly a very clear connection between poverty and health because it actually revolves into things. In hospitals, there are effectiveness and both quality. So effectiveness depends on whether if the doctor can actually doctor's skills and if the doctor has actually the capability to diagnose with you with like the disease or the illness you have, and the quality is about the facility and the tools or the technology that the hospital actually has in order to treat you. And poverty is actually can affect these two things because firstly, the effectiveness will actually drop very drastically compared to the medical treatment that we get in the current status quo. Because especially in these developing countries, the doctors most likely they're gonna be in a it's most likely gonna be a very low effective state because of the lack of education that the individual receives in these developing countries, and secondly, it's a very common phenomenon to see where like in most likely in the developing countries, partial areas of the developing countries are developed, and the other areas most likely the majority of the areas aren't really developed, which means that this is actually very seen a lot, which means that the quality of the medical treatment that the individual gets, most likely who's suffering in poverty, is gonna be very decreased in a negative way. Saying that, let's firstly think about what health inequities is. Health inequities is where there's like inequity in health where there's actually a solution to it, but people aren't solving it. And the similar term to this, but actually different, is about health inequalities. So the difference, so this is basically where there's no solution to it because most likely the disease that is going around is most likely going to be connected to your age or maybe racial background or either like your gender. And now let's think about the differences between health inequalities and health inequities. So as I talked about, health inequities is when there's a solution and health inequalities is when there's actually no solution. So from now, I will mainly focus on talking about health inequities. So let's mainly think about some examples of health inequities. So this actually is mainly shown by the three social classes that appear in today's capitalism society, which is the rich people, middle class people, and the lower class people. So let's think about these three and use the visual representation that I showed to you previously. So let's firstly think about the rich people and think about the feasibility that they have and the accessibility to the medication that they have. So rich people most likely they're going to be able to get the most effective treatment that they can afford in their own country, or maybe it might be like they might be visiting the hospital that is like the best hospital in their town or country or whatnot, which means that this is going to actually provide them with the best quality, best effectiveness of the doctors within their own town, which means because most likely rich people live in these developed countries, such as United States, or maybe it might be the case of Korea or so and so, which means that like in these type of developed countries, it's very most likely that all people get a lot of education, and these people who get education become doctors, and from these doctors there are the doctors who are most effective, and the rich people are able to get accessibility to these doctors because they have the enough capacity of money that they have provided to themselves. What does this mean? This means that the quality also follows of the effectiveness of the doctors. Since most likely, as I talked about, rich people live in these developed countries which have the most developed medical technology within the country, which means that these rich people will be able to get like the best technology that exists within the country. Saying that, let's move on to look at the middle class people that exist in our current status quo. So in the current status quo, we can see that middle class people, they might not be able to get the quality and the effectiveness of these medical service provided to them compared to the rich people. However, they still have the minimal line that they can actually get the proper treatment to the diseases that they have, and maybe get the proper diagnosis of the diseases that they have or whatnot. Since actually the middle class people, this is what I describe as the best, the most medium place of where you can get like a health like quality of medical technology or medical service that is provided to you. Since middle class people, they might visit the middle hospital within their town, which means that it's not going to be as the low quality as compared to people who are suffering in poverty, and it may not be as high quality as the people who are actually the rich people go to like the hospitals, which means that they can still have the minimal effectiveness that they can provide for an individual to actually live their healthy life, And lastly, let's focus on the lower class and look at the effectiveness and the quality. As I talked about the lower class, they're gonna have it's a drastic drop from the middle class to the lower class. Since in some cases, these lower class people, they won't be even able to get proper diagnosis of the diseases that they have in an extreme case. And also, even if they get the proper diagnosis, in some cases it might be that they don't have enough money to afford the certain treatment or certain care that they can get from these hospitals, which means that there's a very drastic change. And saying that, before I move on to my next slides, let's firstly focus let's firstly look at an example of comparing the people in the rich and basically the higher class and the lower class. So let's say that there's a person A and person B. So person A lives in a very rich neighborhood and person B lives in a very poor neighborhood where only lower class people live. So let's say that both people have cancer, but however the difference is that the timing or that they get informed that they are diagnosed with cancer. Most likely, the person who's living in a richer neighborhood, it's most likely that they will get diagnosed by cancer more faster, since there's more higher quality of these medical services that they have, the medical services that they're provided with. Which means that these lower class people, this isn't actually possible for them. In the best case, maybe they might be able to get diagnosed with they might be given the information that they are actually diagnosed by cancer. But however, this isn't going to be true in the most cases, since in the worst case they aren't going to even be informed that they're diagnosed with such diseases, and actually in the worst case they're going to end up dying or passing away. Which means that let's now talk about some solutions to these health inequities. So let me introduce the first solution, which is going to be the increase of welfare provided to these public hospitals that exists in these countries. So the government should actually increase these welfares provided to both these people who are experiencing poverty and also give poverty, because these people and while giving these welfare, the government should actually provide the proper education to these individuals in order to the education where they should educate these individuals into the most effective way to for them to use their money in their daily life, because the main reason of why the government is giving welfare to these individuals is for them to maybe buy some food, to put food on their table, since in most cases they aren't actually able to put food on the table even for themselves and their families, which means that this will actually benefit them, allowing to get more food, accessibility to more food, which means that this can actually increase the quality of health for these individuals. And the second solution is about increasing the funding in hospitals. And this is actually going to be very beneficial, because for example, if it's a developing country, and if the government has the capacity, the government has enough capacity to give funding to these hospitals in order to increase the quality, it means that some of these treatments that is provided in some hospitals are going to be most likely free, which means that these people who are experiencing serious poverty, extreme poverty, are actually going to be able to get these treatments and checkups, which are actually going to be very beneficial, since they're going to be able to get diagnosed with the diseases or maybe get the treatment that they need for the certain disease that they have. And the third solution is about the government making schools encouraging checkups, because for the cases of these people who are in the lower class, it's most likely that even if they have like a certain disease from the young age, it's most likely that they don't notice this because they don't have enough money to get checkups each year annually, which means that the government should actually push the narrative of getting more checkups to these individuals. And now saying that, let's move on to the last solution before I conclude this presentation. About fourthly, the government giving funding to health offices in public schools. So in public schools, it might be the case where like people mainly in the middle class and the lower class go to, which means that it's most likely that the health office is going to be accessible to these lower class people, which means that in the current status quo, if like these health offices are somewhat developed, but however, I think that it can be much more developed so that these lower class people can actually get some treatment and there can be checkups happening from these public health offices in these public schools. To conclude, these are the solutions that I provide to the problem of health inequity. And thanks for listening.